This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. A long, long time ago, there was a king in England. His name was Charles I, and I've actually spoken about him on Body Bags before. He was beheaded. He was beheaded at the order of Parliament, who was loosely controlled by a fellow named Oliver Cromwell. Well, in the wake of the deposing of Charles I, his subsequent execution, Cromwell, elevated to the position of Lord Protector, did away for a short period of time with the monarchy. But as with many things in life and death, it never remains the same, because a few years later, Charles I's son, who'd been living in exile, Charles II, ascended back to power. And when he did, Cromwell had been dead already, buried in a crypt. The remainder of those that had deposed the king were arrested, tried, drawn and quartered, disemboweled while they were alive, as a matter of fact. And then came to Cromwell. They disinterred his body and took his head, cut it off, and stuck it on a spike for all to see. The reason I'm telling you this is that I guess, other than just maybe vengeance in some way, a warning maybe to others, there was really no need to dig old Ollie up, but they did. I don't know how much evidence it provided of anything, but today on Body Bags, we're going to find out if dead men do in fact tell tales, because I think they might. And the tale that I have to tell you today is something that would make even Charles II quiver. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. I've been a part of several exhumations over the course of my career, and it's an odd thing to be present for, I have to say. There's a bit of excitement that goes along with it. There's certainly scientific curiosity, and then there's this little hobgoblin that always lived in the back of my brain, kind of fearful of what we were going to find when we cracked that casket opened and peered inside for the first time, because you never know what you're going to find, Dave.
Is this like something you did on a regular basis?
It's something probably I would be involved in. It seemed to work out where I was at least involved in one per year, maybe even two. And to get an
order, something that happens that easy. They got to go to court and everything else. You got to really prove what you're doing and why to make that happen.
I know I always reference this case because the case is near and dear to my heart. Is Tammy Daybell, and that's a glaring example of this. And it takes, you have to have the full force of law in order to do it. It's often said that judges hate cracking open graves. It's just not their thing. So when you go before the judge to get an order of exhumation, it has to be something that is robust. It has to be something that is proven to be a need, an urgent need, in order to prove something. You can't just randomly go about digging up graves, because that gets into a really dark area called desecration at that point in time. And how many
Once somebody
cases
drops
have
the
you,
D word. Whew.
Yeah, I know. How many times have you and I covered cases like about desecration and abuse of corpses? So you're working
You made us do Ed Gein last week.
Yeah, Lord have mercy. I had to take my brain out and scrub it with Comet. So it's
but just... this case today, Joe, when you talk about solving, and I mean solving a case that goes back 61 years.
Yeah.
And all of the machinations that went into this. I had the chance to look over the case, and because we start at the end, this cold case has been solved, but there's a twist to the exhumation on this one. Not a common thing that happens with regard to solving a cold case like this, but the guy that they actually found, when I'm not trying to bury the lead, but he was never on the radar, Joe. You're talking about technology that wasn't even a glint in 1964. A guy who was a criminal, but not even a suspect in this crime, which is a heinous crime on a wonderful woman who was 50 years old and merely tried to rent the apartment upstairs in her house. That's all she was trying to do, Joe. She's a poor woman at a factory and she just was renting that room. That's it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
happened to her, you're going to have to cover because it's pretty substantial. And it took technology from today, to actually find out who killed her in 1964.
Yeah. Isn't that something? The reason I was drawn to this case is the fact that it reminded me, the victim here, this victim, it actually reminded me a little bit of my wife's grandmother, in the sense that she was not a victim of a homicide, but in the sense that she was a person that worked in a factory, took care of her family, had a great job, actually worked for, and here's a name from the past, she worked for the Lily Tulip Cup manufacturer company, if you remember Lily Tulip. And interestingly enough, when she retired, she worked there for years and years. And there was a group of these ladies that all worked on the assembly line together, and they would meet for coffee, and they called their group the Wilted Lilies was the name of the group. But she worked at this factory, and in addition to that, she rented properties. She had multiple homes or multiple dwellings in Springfield, Missouri. And so she was, doing everything she could to support her family and make a way for them and building up, kind of a nest egg for her family. Kimmy's grandmother was one of the most generous ladies you'll ever come, and just kind-hearted as she can be. And you can kind of see how if this lady was as much like my wife's grandmother as I believe that she probably was, she's probably a very trusting soul. Everybody around there really loved her. As a matter of fact, she was considered to be everyone's, if I'm not mistaken, everyone's favorite aunt, Dave.
Yeah, she was.
And that says a lot. I had, and this lady's name, by the way, is Catherine Blackburn. And I had a special affinity for aunts in my life, ladies that never married, just like this lady. She was all about her family, and they had great love and affection. But, the thing about it is that people that are very trusting many times, they don't have an awareness that there is some monster that is waiting just around the corner to do some of the most horrible things. And we're going to detail these things in this episode that one can possibly even fathom, Dave.
You mentioned how her family looked at her, and I got a quote. Our Aunt Kate loved her faith, family, and friends. She was a daughter, sister, aunt, and neighbor. Catherine Blackburn, you are not forgotten. That's kind of a poignant closing on everything this family went through for 61 years.
Yep. Yeah.
And, I'm thinking about, there was an 81-year-old woman at the ceremony this past week when they announced the conclusion of this crime that began in 1964. She's an 81-year-old woman now. She was 20 when she saw her Aunt Catherine. She was the woman who discovered Aunt Catherine. And imagine how her life has been from the age of 20, young woman at the beginning of adulthood, to now being an 81-year-old senior citizen.
Oh, yeah.
And thinking back to this, I just can't imagine what this would do to your life.
It would be crushing because, this lady, Catherine, that had been such a part of their life. And, you can imagine what she would do. She's probably there for every single holiday, probably hosted holidays at her home, meals, just everything. And probably, oh my Lord, you've got nieces and nephews. you know you're going to get a Christmas present from Aunt Catherine. You know, that kind of endearing person that she was. Everybody looked forward to seeing her and for this woman, as you'd mentioned, that bore witness to this, that actually found her aunt's body, discovered her. It's impossible to plumb the depths of horror because, you know, and even as a death investigator, you will walk on, and we don't try to display that professionally, but there's sometimes when you'll walk onto a scene, Dave, and you're standing there at staring at all that remains of an individual where they have just been brutalized and ripped to shreds, and you can't take the measure of it. Many times you're trying to explain it in your brain, because, you know, the thing about it, Dave, is that you look at someone's body and you see it twisted and bent and broken and burned and scarred and just ripped to shreds. And the first question that comes to mind is not many times who did this to them, but you look at the victim and you'll say, what in the world did this person do to deserve this? And the really horrible thing about this is that, brother, it ain't about what did they do to deserve it. It's about the fact that evil just kind of floats around in the air many times, and you never know whose shoulders it's going to land upon. There's two words that kind of pop to mind when it comes to descriptors of individuals that are sexual deviants. And you've either got an individual that is a masochist who enjoys pain being inflicted upon themselves, or you have an individual who is a sadist who derives pleasure from watching pain being inflicted upon someone else. And many times the sadist is actually involved in inflicting the pain. The reason I bring this up is that many years ago, there was a movie that came out, and it was actually in 2000. And it's a movie called Quills. And it had some of my favorite actors, namely Michael Caine was in there. By the way, do you know how you say Michael Caine in a Cockney accent?
No.
You actually say the word my cocaine, and it goes like this: my cocaine. So there you go. That's in Cockney. That's the extent of my imitations. But it had Michael Caine in it, and the name of the movie. It also had Jeffrey Rush, and many of you guys might remember Jeffrey Rush. It's fantastic, and Kate Winslet. Anyway, the name of the movie was Quills, and it was about, I think Joaquin Phoenix was in it too, and he portrayed a young priest in it. And it had to do with the temporary incarceration of the Marquis de Sade. And you begin to see how depraved he was in this movie. And it's a fictionalized version, but if you go along, you read some of the companion text and some stuff that he was involved in, you begin to see why modern psychiatrists began to pull that term, and now it's an application for people that are just so bent and so evil. And a lot of it roots out of this. And Dave, in this particular case, the coroner back then, based upon the injuries that he observed on Catherine's body, said that whoever did this was a sadistic sex maniac. And I know that sounds very early 1960s in the way that but he's just telling the truth at that point in time. The things that he saw that had been perpetrated upon this poor woman were stuff that I hope that most of us couldn't even begin to fathom, Dave.
Well, and the timing, it happened when you have a 50-year-old woman who is living by herself, and she's trying to rent the apartment upstairs. And she's actually on the phone with her sister when the person who's coming to look at the apartment shows up, and she gets off the phone in a hurry. Hey, gotta go, gotta get the door. Right, and so if Yeah, if you can imagine what that must have been like for the sister later on, to know that she hung up the phone and then answered the door and let Satan in,
Yeah.
flesh come into her home. And based on what took place, I'm
Mhm.
curious, Joe, because we know some of the injuries, but I'm thinking that because this was not a weeping willow of a woman, this is a woman who actually was the forewoman of the Mohawk factory.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Brush
thinking
factory,
she was,
brush
yeah,
company.
yeah. I'm thinking she probably knew her way around how to tell people what to do and things like that. And she wouldn't be the kind of person you'd mess with. So when this person comes to look at the apartment upstairs, I'm thinking that it was a bum rush. I'm thinking he got inside the house and attacked her quickly. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's probably what happened, and she's probably kind and inviting. And plus, look, I mean, she's looking at renting a room.
And by the way, yeah, I meant to tell you, the apartment was upstairs. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where this took place.
Yeah, and she indwelled the same structure, and so
Right.
the apartment is upstairs. And listen, I mean, even back then, people are going to be, they're going to want to know who the individual is. It's going to be living under the same roof with them, right? And you had mentioned that this was probably a bum rush. He gets her up there, or she leads him up there, because you can imagine what it's like. She's leading the way. She's going up the staircase. She's saying, the room's right this way. Follow me, and as he, is trailing behind her up there, this is when I believe that the attack started up in this room. And there is kind of a gap in time here relative to how long this may have took place. I can tell you this, and if this gives you a little hint and insight into timing, Dave, there's one comment, and I'll go ahead and pull back the curtain just a wee bit here. There's one comment that is made by the coroner in this case. This individual said that her torturing that involved heated kitchen knives went on for hours. So from the point that he makes contact with her at the house and they adjourn upstairs to take a look at this space, that's when all hell broke loose. And Dave, I got to tell you, brother, it wasn't an immediate death. She lingered. She lingered while she was enduring torture, and there is multiple evidence of torture over the totality of her body. I mean, it's almost like no surface area was not involved in this.
I saw where she was struck in the head and that she was sexually assaulted while she was unconscious. How can that be told, Joe?
Well, I think that, okay, here's how it can be told. First off, if she is struck in the head, when there's trauma to the head, you've got kind of three levels. There's, and some people might take exception, but in my simple mind, this is the way I measure it. So you've got multiple areas of where hemorrhage can begin to set in. If you've got, say, for instance, a skull fracture, you can have what's referred to as an epidural skull fracture or epidural hemorrhage, which the epidural hemorrhage is the dura covers the brain. It's like the sac that the brain floats in, and the brain and the spinal cord, which are all attached, are awash with cerebral spinal fluid. Do you remember, like, if you've ever taken a first aid class, people will say, if you see blood coming out of the ear, that's significant. But if you see clear fluid coming out of the ear, that's an indication that the interior of the skull has been impacted, and probably the dura has been erupted. And so therefore the CSF fluid, that's redundant, but the CS fluid was literally pouring out of the external ear canal. And that's one of the things you look for with head injuries. So you can still be in that unconscious state and still be very much alive. You're just unconscious. And I don't know that she would have been completely unconscious for the totality of it. I don't know that there's really any way you could tell that because, I don't think that people continue to torture individuals unless they're getting some kind of reaction from them. Now, you might have a pain response in the unconscious state because you've got an individual that has obviously beaten Catherine. But Dave, he is also going to either an adjacent gas stove, which it sounds like it was probably down.
It was downstairs.
In the kitchen.
It was.
And heating what they describe as steak knives.
Yep.
And then returning the steak knives back upstairs, and he's burning them with her, or he's burning her with these. And here's the interesting thing. Now again, this is from the reports from the time, he's actually creating shapes. Mm-hmm. That's a fascinating turn of a phrase there. He's creating shapes with a heated blade, and he's making these quote unquote shapes on both her lips and her chest. And I'm fascinated by this because those are you've got three areas. You got three areas, particularly the female form, that are highly sexualized: the mouth, the breast, and their bottom. Okay. And so any kind of trauma that's being inflicted in those particular areas, as opposed to being burned up and down the arms, for instance, is not as telling, I think, as burning of the lips and certainly burning of the breast, perhaps. And that's what they're alluding to. You got a big surface area there. You can push the hot blade into it. And the idea that he's creating shapes, that's not something that implies that. Just imagine if you could envision a steak knife in your mind where the blade obviously comes to a tip. You can heat it up, and then I could actually, and Lord forgive me, I was sitting here thinking about how this was done. You could create a flower shape with this over and over again, just trying to do it in a circular pattern. So they're saying that he's actually creating these images on her body with a hot knife blade. He's also slashed her throat. And if I remember correctly, in addition to that, he stabbed her in the neck, slashed her throat. And they're saying that this went on for a protracted period of time. And by the way, he's raping her the entire time, off and on. So whoever this is like in a highly frenzied state at this point in time. That gives us an indication, I think, investigatively, that he was probably watching her. And they don't really say, and this is curious, because back in the day, where'd we find out about available apartments? Well, you got to go to the local newspaper, right?
Right.
Or I guess they could have I don't know, back
bulletin board maybe.
Yeah, bulletin board, or they had those you remember the little penny magazines that you could get at the grocery store and whatnot that are adjacent to the aisles, and they'll have ads, like local ads in them. There's, they've got coupons in them and things like that. But he would have targeted her. Now, they're up in Albany, New York, and Albany is not a small place. Of course, it's the governmental hub of the state of New York, certainly. You have all of this area around there. He's targeted her specifically. He's aware of her, and somehow she got onto his radar, Dave.
All I can think, Joe. Now what we know about the suspect, I agree with you 110%. Because after... talk about a weird way of going about this, because, and I don't want to be dismissive, and I apologize. If you're a family member, I hope you realize the care we have taken on this, because it is so devastating emotionally. We all have a family member that fits this profile, I think. We all have that aunt who didn't get married, that is in her late 40s and early 50s and still very active. And she's the funny one usually. And, the one you look, my Aunt Carolyn, I'm thinking about, and so when I wanted to find out about the guy that did this, and it wasn't easy, but once I did, then, Joe, then I realized when you were saying he was watching, maybe it might have gone further than that. It might have been that he had the floor plan. He might have had that place not just staked out, but he knew where the room was, knew where the kitchen was, and knew how much time he would have. Because what did he have to know? He had to be familiar enough with her patterns, her day-to-day work, and to know that there wasn't somebody coming home. This wasn't happenstance. He had to know that this was a single woman who did not have children or a husband coming in, and that he could be there long enough to do everything he wanted to do and to incapacitate her, because it wasn't until a coworker came by and said to pick her up to go to work, and she didn't come to the door and didn't seem to be home. And the coworker calls her sister and says, "Hey, go check on your sister. I don't know what's going on." And so that's where the niece, who now is 81, goes with her mother, Catherine's sister, rather, and they go to check on her. And that's who found her. It wasn't the police. It was her sister and her niece. And he knew all that. He knew he was going to be undisturbed.
I'm really wondering if I'd like to know who previously occupied the space as well. Was this someone that was known to the perpetrator? Like, perhaps, well, first off, he'd have to know that there was a vacancy. Maybe he asked somebody and said, "Yeah, I just moved out of this place. My buddy just moved out of this place. It's available. It's run by this really nice lady that's there." And all you have to do is that, a sadist like this is not looking for a roof over their head. They're looking for their next victim. And unfortunately, in the case of Catherine Blackburn, he found one. So, Dave, you brought out an interesting point that, her coworker didn't see hide nor hair of her, as they say, right? Mm-hmm. And when she alerted the sister, Catherine's sister, went over there with her daughter in tow, the niece, whose name, by the way, is Sandy, got over there. And when they discovered her, they immediately alerted the police. The police, when they arrived, they found, actually, Dave, a ledger that was there at Catherine's home, and it had the name Robert Broadhead. And they found that through tracing indentions.
I thought that was fascinating. That to me, because that's not. I thought when they said there was the name was in a ledger, right? I thought that it was just the receipt, that was standing and it was right there. And then I looked deeper, and that was where they actually saw that something had been written there, but didn't know what it was because it didn't show. And so they did the old, number 2 pencil and, scraped it over and got it that way. And it's like, I wonder, do they do that with kids? Do they teach kids that at school?
I don't know if they do or not, but it's certainly, because you can look at something and see that there is an underlying impression. And that's actually one of the things that I teach a section on question documents, my intro class at JSU, my intro forensics class, because we go over the practice of question document examination. And there's tracings that are like that. And this seems kind of a rudimentary, kind of primitive form of doing this, but if you see it, you have to raise it.
Right.
Nowadays, we would use alternative lighting, where you can blast the area with, polarized light, or you can do infrared, and you can actually raise an indentation. You would never have to touch the paper with like a number 2 pencil.
Oh, that's
now.
Too funny.
But it's still the same. It's still the same principle.
Right.
And it's
amazing.
It's admissible. It's admissible in court. But, the name they came up with was Robert Broadhead. And this gives you an idea as to where these police were back in 1964, Dave. They found nobody in the area that was associated with this name. As a matter of fact, they were at such, and this is fascinating to me, absolutely fascinating. They were at such a dead end and had no leads that they inserted or emplaced a hidden microphone in Catherine's casket, so that if there was somebody that was there at visitation, which you can see some sexual deviant doing this, taking pride in what they had done. If anybody were to make a spontaneous confession standing at the casket, they actually had the casket mic'd up back in 1964. I was fascinated by that, man.
I saw that in the reports, and I was going, okay, well, in a casket, you can hide it because, you even on an open casket, you only keep the waist up. So you've got plenty of room there to hide everything. And I wonder what they did here. This is something that it's not the only time that police have done something like that.
And so this was obviously a practice that went on. I'm not saying that it doesn't go on today, but it's kind of an interesting way. And,
you
have to, they were desperate. But, the thing about it, Dave, is what's really cool about this case, and I'm saying cool in a scientific way, is that the answer to the big question, who was this, actually rested right beneath Catherine's body at the scene. And that is the information that they were so seeking. And listen, I'm not slighting the people in the past. That it's the past. It's the way they were limited by the type of technology they had. But I will give them a tip of the cap here, because they found there was a handkerchief that they found beneath her body. And back then they tested that handkerchief and actually found remnant of semen. Now we have to understand that we did not have DNA technology back then. The idea in 1964 that we could have used DNA in order to, kind of integrate into crime solving was something that, I don't know that it had occurred to anybody. Maybe it had. But, one of the things that you would look for with seminal deposition and serologists. Serology is a section within crime labs that has housed the DNA section now for a long, long time. Serology deals with not just blood, but semen, urine, feces, stomach contents, you name it, saliva. There's a certain percentage of the population, male population, that are secretors. And so with secretors in saliva, feces, and semen, you can find red blood cells. And one of the things that they would do is if an individual, and I can't remember the percentage, it seems like it's 40, maybe 40%, 35, 40% of the population are secretors. If you get lucky and you get one of the secretors that has left behind seminal deposition, you can actually check that semen sample for red blood cells. And if you can get a red blood cell, you can type the blood. But even then, with ABO grouping, you're kind of limited, A pos, A neg, B pos, B neg, O pos, O neg, and then you've got A pos, so forth and so on. So you're kind of limited. The rarest, of course, I think is AB neg, if I'm not mistaken. And so that's how limited it is. But Dave, they held on to that sample for years and years. And this was a cold case. And it wasn't until actually a college, along with a forensics detective in Albany PD, got involved in this case, Dave, back in 2018, I think it was. This forensics detective that was assigned to look into a cold case, her name was Melissa Morey. And again, a big tip of the cap to her, because she took this to a professor that ran the Cold Case Analysis Center at the College of St. Rose. Her name is Dr. Christina Lane, took this sample there, and they began to work this case to try to determine who exactly was this. So the kids get this cold case and they begin working it. Well, as it turned out, they had the seminal sample that they could do a comparison with, Dave.
Isn't that shocking that they were able to take a piece of evidence from 1964 and now again, 2018, they start working it. But it's interesting how the field of genetic genealogy has grown with DNA. I was looking through the amount of time and effort because, again, 2018, they actually had they're right there. They're right on the cusp of figuring this out, but no solution yet. In 2023, the Cold Case Analysis Center at St. Rose was given a grant from Seasons of Justice. It's a nonprofit that funds efforts to further investigate cold cases using DNA. And they actually coughed up $9,700. They believed in what they were doing at St. Rose so much. And that's where actually Othram was involved. That this all developed into a genetic genealogy case, Joseph Scott Morgan, that you and I have talked about on this show, of using some of the smartest people in the world to create these opportunities now to take some. Joe, it's a handkerchief underneath a person's body in 1964. They have they've talked to everybody. They had a list of possible suspects. Okay. They had them, checked them all out. They all had alibis. They had nothing. But then they have this DNA, and a detective starts working it, and the science gets involved. And the next thing you know, you've got students that are involved. I can't imagine the educational value of this for them career-wise, of watching this take place. And still, from 2018 until now.
And listen, here's another way that, the police are disadvantaged, that if you have a group of, let's say, scholars or college kids that are being directed by scholars, I think that a lot of people labor under this idea that cops have all the time in the world to work cases, and they don't. And I got called in to consult on a case that was up in Pennsylvania several years ago, and the case is from 1970. And I remember going to speak with the detectives from the cold case squad with Pennsylvania State Police, and I'm not putting words in their mouth, but this case was from 1970, Dave. All right, that they had. They have a limited number of members on this squad. Okay, they have more recent cold cases that they're trying to get solved. And the thing about it is, the longer time goes by, the more faded memories get, the more compromised evidence can get, and you don't have unlimited resources. However, if you put a group of students that are being directed by a scholar, and you have consultation with a police department, that's a lot of brain power. And it's a lot of enthusiasm too. Yeah. When you get older and you're not quite as enthusiastic, but I've seen a room light up, in the cold case class I teach at Jack State. These kids, their eyes like suddenly burst open, and they're like, we're going to be, analyzing a cold case. What can we put together? And suddenly their brain is stimulated, and you put a bunch of energetic kids along with a professor that's motivated, and there are not too many mountains you can't climb, with that kind of energy. Right. But they're focused on that one case. Whereas, how many other cold cases have there been in Albany, New York since 1964, man? Yeah. It builds up over time. But yeah, they did have this biological evidence. And believe it or not, what's really fascinating about this is most of the time when you and I cover cases that are cold cases, many times we will be examining cases that involve remains of unknown individuals, and they'll have to go back and backtrack, determine who the person is. They get genetic material from that individual. You've got a body, or you have what remains of a body, and they're able to get them identified. That's not what happened in this case, Dave. We knew who Catherine Blackburn was. They've always known who she was. The question was, who was her perpetrator? Well, because of the genetic material that had been left behind, and their efforts there, and the preservation these many years later, Dave, they had so much data that they had built up, and they had gotten down to the brass tacks of everything. Dave, they got an order of exhumation, and they exhumed the body of who they thought was a suspect, Dave.
That had to have been an intense battle. I mean, we started off the show talking about how difficult it is. It's not something that judges are just do. And now you're talking about, in this case, the person is a suspect who was never a suspect in life. He's now dead. Think about that. Now you're going to tell me this guy that you never thought he was never on your list, Joe. And now you're saying he is. No. Okay, you had a chance to talk to him for however many years before he died. Now he's been dead for 25 years and you want to go dig him up. Okay, let me see what you got. Exactly. Okay, I'm looking at your evidence. All right, here's the shovel, boys. Let's go dig him up,
Well, the thing about it turns out this guy's name is actually Joseph Nowosky. And he had been, no one delude yourself into thinking this guy's an airy-haired little angel. All right.
No,
he had a long history of scumbaggery. All right. That you can fall back onto here starting back in actually, I think,
1950.
And 1950, he was 18 years old.
Yeah, but hey, Joe,
he was, yeah.
We mentioned briefly about had he been watching Catherine, had he been scoping out her place, because he was there for a long time torturing her. And this guy was a career criminal. And at one point, can I give you the greatest hits of our killer, of what he did?
Yeah,
I mean,
sure. Absolutely.
After he gets caught in 1950, he gets caught burglarizing a house with a 15-year-old. He's only 18. Goes to jail. He ends up joining the U.S. military. Now, a lot of times, judges back then, you got a young man going astray.
Yeah.
Here's your choice, boys. You got 5 years in the pen or go in the military.
Yeah.
Goes in the military. Gets out in 1958. And from then until 1961, apparently, according to his neighbors, he didn't do anything. He didn't have a job. Didn't work. Young man, doesn't work. He's now 33 at the time of the murder of Catherine. But this is a guy who, from 1961 till 1973, he's committing armed robberies. He's breaking into homes. They even caught him with a kit in the mid 60s where he had 2 switchblade knives, burglary tools like a crowbar and an alcohol torch, and detailed floor plans of private homes and businesses in Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo. Detailed plans of private homes. That's why I say this guy was the kind of guy that thought things through.
Yep.
He knew who lived there. He knew what her lifestyle was like. And that's why I think, based on that, I bet he had a floor plan for that house.
They probably did. Yeah. Can anyone here say modus operandi?
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, they throw that term around, MO. But yeah, Dave, I mean, he had an MO. That's why, the big question is, had he scoped her out to the point where he knew her comings and goings? And it's not like her and her family are longtime residents of Albany.
Right.
They've got an established family history there. They're known about town, and he's not unfamiliar with this area. He's fully familiar with it. Who's to say he wouldn't have crossed paths with any of her relatives and probably her, maybe at the grocery store or wherever it was. And he's at his core, he's a predator, and predators stalk their prey. And they're looking for opportunities. And I've always there's always this kind of creepy little thing that goes on, I think, with people that commit burglaries, because I don't think that they all go in to necessarily, and what a weird word, burglarize a home. I think a lot of it is going in when no one is there and viewing the home. Going into private areas and digging through private things and just observing. And I think that there's an indwelling. It's not just thievery. There's like an indwelling sexual sickness to it in many of the cases. And they just say that they are burglarizing homes. And you can burglarize a home without stealing anything. Yeah. But, and in Catherine's case, here's another point. There was nothing stolen. Right. There was nothing stolen whatsoever. Except, thank you so much. You're absolutely right. Except for her life, the most valuable thing that was inside of that dwelling, Dave. What happens with this case after this?
Okay, 9 years after he kills Catherine, 9 years later, he attacks a 74-year-old lady in Schenectady, New York, who woke up in her bed May 16, 1973, covered in blood and confused. She calls police. She's taken to the hospital with a fractured skull, cuts to her back and face. The hatchet-wielding attacker left two clues at the scene, Joe. a gold crown, dental crown, and a glove. Now, he almost got away with this, but here's the problem. He got drunk and went driving. He takes the police on a wild chase. And, of course, you know what? You want to piss off cops? Make them chase you.
Yeah.
Make them get into a high-speed pursuit, or even worse, make them run after you.
Well, it's like the quote from Chris Rock. He said, if the police have to chase you, they're bringing an ass kicking with them. So there you go.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So anyway you look at it, when he's intoxicated, they get him for leaving the scene of an accident, other traffic violations, and resisting arrest. And by the way, possession of a dangerous weapon, a knife with a 4.5-inch blade. And by the way, they're looking in the car now. What do we have here? A hatchet with blood on it? That's how they got him for the Schenectady attack. By the way, it was a town councilman named Fred Isabella. Town councilman, also a dentist, was called in to take a look at the old gold crown and matched it up to his tooth
and tied it back to him. Yeah, it's like a kind of living odontology.
Yeah,
as opposed to forensic odontology. Well, it is forensic odontology. It's just that most of the time it's practiced on the dead. But here, you've got an individual that literally marries up a restoration on a tooth, a crown, and marries it up to the guy that's the perpetrator.
Yeah.
Again, 73, you don't have DNA to work with, but that's physical evidence that was accepted well enough in court that that's a nail in your coffin.
He went to prison. He got 3 to 15 years. He served 7. He got out in 1980. So we know what he did to Catherine in 1964. We know what he did to the lady in Schenectady in 73. He does go to prison, but when he gets out in 1980, apparently, Joe, he learned a lesson and flew under the radar until he died in 1998. So that's why they had to go dig him up once they were able to narrow down.
Yeah. And that's significant here because, when you think about it, he's no longer to be found anywhere. Once you start to dig into this genetic tree, if you will, what's the old game? Or I guess it's Magic 8 Balls. What is it? It says all signs point to yes. When they begin to process this, they have an idea that this is who it is. But guess what? We ain't got nothing to compare it to. Hey, boys, break out the picks and shovels. Here we go. And off to the graveyard they go. They disinter this guy, dig him up, Dave, take him to the lab and take DNA samples off of his body, and bingo. They got the perpetrator. They got the perpetrator in Catherine Blackburn's homicide all the way from 1964, these many years later. And the reason we're reporting on this and discussing this case is the fact that this has just been cleared after all of this time. And this proves that, I think for a long, long time in the cold case world, it was kind of helpless and hopeless many times. Mm-hmm. But the thing about it, Dave, is that with genetic material, those days of being kind of overwhelmed that there are so many cases out there that will never get solved. This is proof that if you do what you're supposed to do, even back in 1964, like these brave people did back then, they processed that scene, they collected the evidence. They didn't know. They had no idea that all the way in 2025, that handkerchief that they picked up at that scene would be the answer to clear one of the most heinous homicides off the books in Albany, New York. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.